Daniel, thank you so much for doing this. How are you doing, man?
Hey Rob, how's it going?
So, if you don't know Daniel Joe, I highly recommend following him on Twitter and all the different places that he's at. He's a verified author over at Crypto Potato and has just been nailing it on his analysis of Bitcoin. He does a lot of on-chain work, which basically studies the flows of Bitcoin on and off chain. So, Daniel, you were the first time we spoke, you were getting a much larger position down around the mid 30s. How do you feel about this current market and after you've kind of nailed the trade so well since the beginning of this?
Yeah, it feels really good to be able to accumulate Bitcoin in the low 30s back in June, July, because it was just fundamentally very undervalued and also had technical support. Uh, so I ended up selling Apple stock to fund that purchase, and that's been a very good decision so far. And also, actually, I did the same again. So back in September, when Bitcoin corrected from 53,000 to about 39.6 thousand, I sold Apple again near all-time highs and bought the dip between the mid 40s and low
It's
40s.
crazy.
So
You got it at the lowest and you got it right, sold it right at the point where it's like it's just starting to top out a bit on Apple. So I honestly, you've said that in the past that it's like the best transfer over trade. If you didn't watch the first video we did, I actually decided to start doing the podcast just here on the main channel to not confuse everybody. I had separated it onto a different channel and he did the first video that we did over there, but this one's being posted on the main channel. So it's if you haven't watched that video, I highly recommend watching the first one. But Daniel got into Tesla very early, got into Apple very early, and he's transferred from Apple in some of his Tesla, not all of his Tesla, but mostly out of Apple into Bitcoin, correct? And you
yeah,
consider that like the best transfer trade you've ever done before.
yeah, I still consider it the best rotational trade I've ever done because, like I said again, how often in history can you sell an asset that's near full valuation and rotate into an asset that's undervalued and so attractive, and most of all has so much upside potential in the next 6 months to a year or even this decade. So for me, it's the opportunity cost was just too large. I couldn't sit there and just watch Bitcoin down 50% and do nothing about it. So I was like, I pulled the trigger, and this was pretty much my biggest sale of Apple happened this year. And I feel really confident about it. And now that we're at 62, 61,000, I think we had a good rally from 30K, but I really think this is still just the beginning of the rally. And I think we're entering the next leg up in the bull market because the fundamentals and the on-chain trend have only strengthened since we talked just a few months ago. So we have a lot of upside.
What's crazy too is we did this Twitter space the other day and you were one of the few people that was up at like around 61, 62, and you're like, I think there could be a little bit of a retrace here. And then turns out there was a little bit of a retrace. It fell back down to like 59 real quick and then just recovered right now. So it was cool that you went against the grain and you kind of nailed that I was going to pull back a little bit. And now it's back up above 60 grand. How do you feel about it back above this level here? Do you still think there might be another pullback? Because there's this ETF news. Like, how do you feel about the possible dropping of a Bitcoin ETF, and how does it affect the market? I think my clock just refreshed over there. Where are we at? $62,075 per Bitcoin right now on the current refresh. So how do you feel above here? Because it feels like it's almost like it's different than the last break over 60,000, where it's kind of developing more of a foundation. In comparison, because it was just a very brief break last time I went to 65,000, and then it pulled back and had that gnarly retrace down to 30,000, where we both started accumulating quite a bit. But how do you feel about it at this level, and how do you feel about the ETF?
Yeah, so I think near term, I was a little bit cautious because of the big run up in a short amount of time. But the trend is still very, very bullish. Just cautious because the open interest, funding rates, leverage ratios are a little bit elevated. It's not as crazy as back in March and May, where it was very, very high and very elevated for a while. So we're not really seeing as much risk as back then, but there's always risk of a near-term liquidation or wipeout because of just a big rally. And any simple selling on spot or anything could trigger these liquidations. So we have to be cautious. And also, investors should know that buy the rumor, sell the news is a very common thing in the markets, and Bitcoin is not immune to that. So I made a post a couple of days ago on Twitter saying, we got to be cautious. 63K might be just near-term local technical top, and it turns out that was the case. And at the time of this recording, Bitcoin made a record weekly closing high, which is very good. But before that weekly close, we had a 6.6% drop from that that local high, and it wiped out about $500 to $600 million worth of leverage, during that pullback. But then Bitcoin pushed right back up, which is good to see. So this could be the maybe quick sell the news, quick kind of pullback that we've been anticipating. It's still a bit hard to tell because the week has yet to start. The ETF is launching, this coming week, and we also have earnings season coming up, which is where we might anticipate big announcements from companies that were buying the dip back in June, July. So it's a bit hard to tell. I hope that this is that quick pullback, because after that, I'm expecting bullish continuation and all-time highs. So we'll have to see. I'm still a little cautious, but I like what I'm seeing so far.
Just so for everybody watching, we're making this video about 9:45 Pacific time on Sunday. So market opens tomorrow, Monday. So just so you have a little bit. What's nice about when we do these videos with that clock up there now is you can actually know what price of Bitcoin is when we're making these videos. So that's kind of cool compared to the last time. So with the on-chain analytics, like what are you seeing on-chain right now with it back up at 62,000? Is there anything different than you saw from a few days ago when we did the space?
Overall, we saw some light distribution when Bitcoin kind of tapped that 55 to 58,000 key levels of resistance, because those levels were have a lot of supply, and also it's very technical resistance. So we saw just very minor profit taking, a little bit from older hands and some from the younger coins, but it wasn't anything concerning. So we did not see any aggressive signs of distribution or profit taking from the older coins and miners, which is very good to see. So any form of light distribution is expected. I took a look at the previous data from the 13 and 17 cycle, and what I found was there was a little bit of distribution before Bitcoin made all-time highs, breaking above the 2013 peak. And then after that, price soared, and we saw more distribution. In the 17 cycle, we actually did not see any distribution until Bitcoin pushed above the previous all-time high, which is the second peak in 2013. So, and after that, then the price ran up like crazy, and we saw a distribution. So my guess for this cycle is we're probably going to see just a little bit of light distribution, kind of like around between 60 and 65K, just kind of before we make all-time highs. And after that, I think price is going to take off, head towards 70, 80, 90, 100K, and that will lead to more long-term holders starting to distribute, which is completely normal, because that's what happens in bull markets. When the price appreciates, all these holders that have been holding for many years, they start taking profit. And that causes the meme coinage and the supply held by long-term holders, and also miners, to start dropping, which is fine. So it's when price goes up and you see distribution, that's a good signal. When price is going down and you see distribution, that is not good. That's a bear market, or signals that there's the structure is weakening. So right now we're seeing price go up and not really that much distribution. So that means that they're not selling this rally. Some are, but the overall trend, no, they're accumulating, but they will soon.
And that bounce was pretty wild, wasn't it? The bounce, it like went down to 58, 59-ish, right? And it was like, boom, right back up to 62K. That was a heavy, if you look up on the chart, if you're watching this, that was a really, somebody was buying. So it's crazy to see that big of a jump back up. And to see what you're talking about. As it's going up, you're not seeing very much distribution. You'll see some distribution because obviously some people are going to take profit, but not very much, not what you would see if it was a bear market.
Yeah, and also wanted to add, so, the pullback back in September, it was a 20% plus pullback, but it was actually very bullish because it followed Elliott wave structure. So we had a nice ABC corrective wave. So I think this is the sub wave 2 of larger wave 5 to the upside, and now we're starting sub wave 3, which is a very big move to the upside. On top of that, the on-chain was looking very good. So during that pullback in September, we had the El Salvador FUD, or the launch, and then the huge liquidations, and just a weakness in the broader equity markets. We saw the spot exchange reserves keep declining and making new all-time or multi-year lows the entire time. So this pullback was really just an opportunity for the big players to keep adding. So I think there was probably anticipation of a Bitcoin ETF, or just because at that point also we had a nice technical breakout. So that means the dips are more attractive to buy. And pair that with bullish on chain, that means the dips are very attractive to buy. So I think just seeing all these things happen back in September, price falling, but also it was actually holding and actually outperforming the S&P. So we actually saw divergence during that time, which is really good because the dollar was creeping up a little bit. There was, global risk off in the market. But the fact that Bitcoin held support at 40K and began outperforming the S&P during that time signaled that there's a lot of strength in Bitcoin. And that has led, to this massive breakout, which is really, really good to see. So I think, yes, S&P is still down a bit, but I've been pounding the table on the risk on trade returning for a while because, as I mentioned, we did not see any signs of a cyclical top in the broader markets. For example, when S&P was back at all-time highs, there was so much bearish and cautious sentiment on the market, and also a lot of the funds have not been deployed, and also it's just like you don't get these cyclical tops when there's still bearish sentiment. Cyclical tops occur when all the bears flip bullish and everyone has bought in, meaning there's no buyers left in the market. Right now, there's still a lot of people that are bearish on S&P. And when they flip bullish, that will likely start the leg up and resume the risk on trade in the market. And if that happens, which I think it will, that will be a big tailwind for Bitcoin. So right now, the dollar, I think, is topped out. We're seeing money flow out of long-term bonds. So when money flows out of long-term bonds, it indicates that money is rotating out of long-term bonds back into risk assets such as stocks and Bitcoin. And that's going to be a huge rocket fuel for the risk on trade and Bitcoin. So I think I'm very bullish, just near-term cautious though.
That's a perfect segue into what I wanted to ask you next is it seems that we're entering a bit of a stagflation type environment here where it's them putting more and more and more money into the system, but the system is only going slightly up or staying kind of fizzled out on the stock market right now. You had talked about in the past how you're starting to consider taking all of your equities out of the stock market and go solely into Bitcoin. How do you feel right now in this environment in the stock market? Do you feel like there could be a sell-off? Do you think it's going to be more of a stagflation environment? Because I tend to lean towards stagflation, but how do you feel it's going to be over this next couple year period after how much money printing they're doing? And it doesn't seem like the Fed's going to stop anytime soon. And if they do stop, Yellen's going to go drop a $5 trillion coin over in the Fed anyway. So it's like, where does it stop? And do you see it like an inflation, stagflation, or deflation type environment? And are you trying to get out of equities now and go into Bitcoin, into self-custody Bitcoin?
That's a big question. So I'll have to break it down.
Yeah, sorry. We'll focus on this. Let's focus on the stagflation environment. Do you see it being a stagflation or an inflation type environment here?
Well, it depends on how you look at it. So when you take the S&P and you divide it by the M2 money supply, we've gone nowhere for the past 2 decades. It's a joke. So people that are bragging about all their gains in the stock market, well, if you consider how much money has been printed, you haven't really gone anywhere. And also, the price of things that we need in life, like real estate or groceries, have gone up significantly, but everyone's pays have stayed the same. So you really have to invest in assets that outpace the price of or cost of living or the cost of assets that you need to buy. So that's why I think Bitcoin is the best hedge against all of that. So I really think that in dollar terms, the market is entering kind of the final euphoric phase of this, multi-year bull market, and I think it will probably eventually crash because, just fundamentally, stocks are still overvalued. But that's because rates are at zero. The Fed is printing trillions, so the money has to flow somewhere. And I don't think they're going to be able to taper or raise rates because there's so much debt out there that if they raise rates, it's gonna be catastrophic. So they're gonna probably do what they did last time, walk it back and go back to QE infinity or start more QE infinity. So it's just the macro environment, in my opinion, is more favorable for risk assets, but for the wrong reasons. And I really think that Bitcoin is the best position out of everything because of the scarcity. It's still very early. It's very undervalued, even at 60K, in my opinion. And stocks are great, and they will keep going up, in my opinion. But it's, in my opinion, more risky, and the upside is very limited. So so I want to segue into my positioning in the market. So I've had a lot of growth stocks over the years, but I sold most of them. And at this point, I'm really convinced that I'm just going to rotate fully into crypto, meaning I'm going to still have some stocks, but a lot of them are going to be Bitcoin exposed or exposed to Bitcoin. So whether it's Bitcoin miners, MicroStrategy, or other investments, I'm doing that because I think Bitcoin has so much more upside. Yes, I like AMD, I like Nvidia, I like all these growth stocks, but how much more can they go compared to Bitcoin? I think Bitcoin is going to outperform them in the next 6 months, in the next 5 years, this decade. So I'm going to slowly rotate out. The higher these stocks go, the more I'll sell, rotate out into Bitcoin. And I've been buying MicroStrategy as well since we were first recording.
Yeah, I remember we were both getting into it in the lower 600s here, and it's finally getting a little bit of legs on it. It's what is that, 750 now? I'm looking at on my left over here on the chart. I actually wanted to bring up MicroStrategy, but you brought up some great points about the Fed, and I couldn't agree more that Powell's bluffing when he says he's going to raise the rates, because we all know if he raises the rates, everything tanks. And he doesn't want to do it on his watch, at least, because at the end of every one of his speeches, he's like, well, it's going to happen in 2022, ironically, right when my term might be up, and like everything's right after his term might be up. And then on top of it, he always says, well, if inflation was so bad, well, then we'll use the tools at hand at the Fed here to do something. So basically he's puts that little loophole in for him. He's not really going to do what he says. He's going to probably go to negative interest rate and just keep pumping and pumping more money. So I love that you brought that up. But going to MicroStrategy and the Bitcoin position that they have, we've talked about this in the past. And that short flow, I think, is at like 23% still. I think it went to like 26, and then it pulled back just a little bit. So people started covering a little bit with this run up. But right now we're at 750. Its all-time high was a little bit over 1,300. MicroStrategy is sitting on around $6 billion worth of Bitcoin with a $7 billion cap. So if Bitcoin continues to go up like this with that kind of a short float, you're looking at an interesting short squeeze scenario. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I think MicroStrategy has been very attractive, especially back in September when we had the pullback. It went down to the, I think, 550s, 560s. So I was able to pick up a good amount of shares at those levels because it was very confluent with technical support, but also fundamental attractive levels. So what I found was that the premium on the business before their Bitcoin purchase was roughly $900 to $1 billion. Sorry, $900 million to $1 billion. So that premium right now, or back then during the pullback, dropped down to $300 million. So essentially they were holding, I forgot the number, it was like 5.5 whatever billion dollars, and MicroStrategy was trading at like 5.8. So the difference between the Bitcoin holdings and the company, was just $300 million. And that was very, very attractive. And also what I noticed during the pullback in terms of technicals, when Bitcoin and the markets were tanking, MicroStrategy was falling, but with very, very low volume. It was like a third of the daily traded volume. So there was almost no actually selling. I think it was just market makers just, kind of pushing price lower. And also just, I guess people are just kind of looking at the balance between the company value versus the Bitcoin holdings. So, but if you just think about MicroStrategy as a company, I mean, they still have high margin recurring revenue, and they still have the ability to keep buying Bitcoin over time. So, and Saylor made it very clear he's not selling. So the fact that Bitcoin kept going down and the stock kept going down and the premiums were dropping, and we still have a lot of short interest, we still have a lot of institutional ownership, and a bull market in front of us that's going to, in my opinion, take off. That was very, very attractive. So that's why I kept buying, because there was just technical and fundamental support.
It seems really ripe. If there's, that's what's funny is when we're talking about the ETF, it's like that seems like the better option. You have a lot of different possibilities with MicroStrategy, and so they can, like you said, they continue to leverage. They can continue to buy Bitcoin. They might buy a miner. You never know what they're going to do in the near future. That changes the entire estimation. These miners are going for like 7-8x multiples of their Bitcoin position, whereas MicroStrategy is sitting at just over 7 billion from what I see over here on the left. When I'm looking over here, I'm looking at the other screen. And I have MicroStrategy actually pulled up. I wanted to talk about it. So it's at 7.06 billion on its market cap, and it's sitting on a little bit over 6 billion worth of Bitcoin. All it's done is buy more Bitcoin since its all-time high at lower prices. So it seems like it's just ripe to really start rocketing. So this ETF news, I like your idea that it might be a sell the news type of thing, because it's not that big a news, it seems like. Although it's like it helps the mainstream adoption of Bitcoin, it seems like there's already avenues there. and MicroStrategy might be a better avenue than the ETF with a little bit more of a risk there. But you have Grayscale and you have MicroStrategy, but this is just another thing hitting the market. So it doesn't really change the sentiment, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. Or does it change the sentiment? Like, how do you feel would you rather be in the ETF than MicroStrategy or Grayscale? Like, how do you feel about the different options there?
Yeah, I honestly, I prefer Bitcoin miners and MicroStrategy than the ETF or GBTC. I think there's just a lot more excitement around MicroStrategy and the miners, and it reflects in price. So a lot of the miners, they're trading at 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 times the value of the Bitcoin holdings. And for MicroStrategy, I mean, we know that they're a strong company that can pay their debt, the interest, the principal, and also fund future purchases of Bitcoin. So whether it's miners or MicroStrategy, we know that their Bitcoin holdings keep going up over time. So that only makes the value of the holdings in the company more valuable, which is, in my opinion, very attractive. So, and I'm really surprised that MicroStrategy is still trading at a 1.1, 1.2 times valuation to their holdings. And I think if we have this continued price appreciation in Bitcoin, I think it's really going to pressure the shorts and cause a squeeze to the upside on MicroStrategy. And I would like to see the premiums increase to reflect that. But also to show that, like, hey, if miners can get awarded these lofty multiples, then I think MicroStrategy should also get the same or a similar multiple. Probably not as high, but if you just compare these on a valuation basis, MicroStrategy is very, very attractive.
It's the only stock I own, so you're a little bit more in equities than I am. I just it's so hard for me to put money, to wire money into the stock market, knowing what I know right now. It's like the solvency issue on the banking situation. It's like if I see there being so many possible problems there. Like, you started the stock, hopefully you sell it in time, and then it goes to an exchange. Hopefully they're solvent and they send it to the bank. Hopefully the bank is solvent and you can get it from the bank. It's like those steps in that ladder. We had talked about this in a prior space, on Twitter, and it's like, does it scare you at all thinking about, like, how do I get my money out if things don't work in my favor right now and with this market? It just seems so scary to me. Maybe I'm crazy. Maybe it's maybe I'm just thinking too much about it, but it just scares me. The not owning it in self custody and owning it and putting it in cold storage. It's a very small position relative to my Bitcoin position in MicroStrategy. But how do you feel about having money in equities right now with everything that could happen with the dollar, with everything that could happen with solvency issues at these banks? Does it ever scare you at all?
Of course, there's always risk with whether it's your car, your home, your brokerage account. There's counterparty risk because you're putting trust in a third party that's holding your assets. So as Bitcoiners, if we hold our own coins, our own keys, that's sovereignty. We own the asset and we can verify it through a node or just look on the blockchain. But with your bank account or your brokerage, you're just praying that things will be okay. So, and for years, I never really thought about that until I became a Bitcoiner. So the good thing is for me, over the years, more and more money flowed out of my brokerage accounts into crypto exchanges and now cold storage. But it's always in the back of my mind. There's always risk, counterparty risk with these assets, and just thinking about it only makes me more bullish on Bitcoin, because now I really value decentralization and the proper ownership of assets. So yes, I think stocks and real estate are great. They're great ways to hedge against inflation, but they come with counterparty risk, and I feel much more comfortable holding Bitcoin than leaving it on exchange or even having Bitcoin related equities. So it's just we have to be cautious about that. And yes, over time, people are talking about tokenizing stocks and all these things, but at the end of the day, we have to ask ourselves, what's the most decentralized solution out there? It's Bitcoin.
Yeah, it was an interesting crossover for me because I'm so big in precious metals. Me, I like my utility precious metals. I like my silver, my platinum, my palladium. Not too big of a fan of gold, but I like the utility precious metals quite a bit right now. Platinum's finally starting to get some legs on it and stuff. But what I know from precious metals is that if you don't hold it, you don't own it. And in Bitcoin, it's not your keys, not your coins. It's so funny because it's very similar mottos. It wasn't until I took my Bitcoin off the exchange and had it in my own device where I realized, I'm like, wait a minute, I can take self-custody of this. So I think that this narrative of being like gold versus Bitcoin or something is not the right narrative. It's really over $1 quadrillion of financial assets out there versus, a 10, $15 trillion space between Bitcoin and precious metals. So it's like, why not just focus on how much money could flood into these assets in this current marketplace? But the big thing is like, there isn't very many options where we can self-custody our asset. Like even real estate, though, it's like you're tied down to a certain place. But with Bitcoin, you can put it in your head. You can go anywhere you want. You can bring this device with you. I find it to be like an excellent, a lot of people might be mad at me for saying I'm not all in Bitcoin. I have quite a bit of precious metals, but it's like, there isn't that many options where you can just, there's only one where you can just put it in your head and go anywhere in the world. So it's like, if you're not in Bitcoin, it's probably a good diversification tool to have, 10, 20% if you don't have any right now. I think it's foolish to be all in, foolish to have none. Some might agree, some might disagree with me, but I've been saying that for a long time on this channel, specifically before it was even 10,000. I was calling out Peter Schiff saying like, why are you making it this headbutting match? Like it just doesn't make sense that it's like, what let's go against this crazy monster of money out there, bring it into this space, like there's a lot of fake money out there to spare. So it really, to me, the self-custody thing is a big deal. And I'm happy that you think about it as well. I thought I'm kind of, maybe I'm a little crazy, but it's like most of my Bitcoin is in self-custody. And I get so nervous even about the MicroStrategy position I have. That's one of the few things that I might sell. I might sell and put that into Bitcoin itself. Have you put any thought into like what your allocation is from cold storage versus stuff that's, I guess this would be on chain, so to speak, right? Like it'd be on an exchange or like in the stock market with another company on their balance sheet. Like how much allocation are you thinking about in that regard?
It fluctuates because of all the price action and stuff. So, but a very large amount is sitting in cold storage, and I also have a portion set aside to trade the cycles. So I bought years ago. So that's on an exchange, and I'm going to sell at technical and on-chain targets to the upside. But most of it is sitting in cold storage, and it's just just chilling there. So I stopped the day trading, the very quick trade stuff. When I say trade, I'm talking about cycles. So that I want to make that very clear. But the rest is just sitting in cold storage. So, and when it comes to equities, I will likely take profits on my remaining non-Bitcoin related companies and rotate that into MicroStrategy, or take it off and put it into the crypto exchanges so I can buy more Bitcoin. So essentially my exposure to equities is going down and my exposure to crypto or Bitcoin keeps going up. And that's been a very strong trend for the past couple of years.
Yeah. It gives you some sort of peace almost, when you put it in cold storage for the first time, you're like, wait a minute, like I don't have to touch this. It's safe. And it's like that Jesse Livermore quote. I've brought this up on the channel in the past. It's like, I think it was Jesse Livermore that said, I didn't make my money from trading. I made my money from sitting on my hands. And I know that's your strategy in your trading. It's like, you have something that you have conviction on, you find these misunderstood places and you sit on your hands. You go and you make your position, you sit on your hands on them. And there's something to be said about that, because in this market, there's so many people that want to make a quick buck overnight. They forget about capital gains. They forget about the risk. They get into this hype, into this gambling type hype. But the truth is this, like with Bitcoin, if you just sat on your hands for a while, you're doing pretty dang well. It was like up over 400% in the past year. So everybody who listened to only the Peter Schiff narrative and didn't have any diversification is certainly thinking to himself, well, I wish I just sat on my hands on a little bit of a Bitcoin position, So I guess one of the things that I'm trying to do on my channel is merge the audiences between precious metals and Bitcoin, because they really are birds of the same feather. I just wish that there was less headbutting going on. But I wanted to change from the self-custody. So obviously you have a ton in self-custody. You believe in cold storage more than any way to hold your Bitcoin, because it's like you don't have to worry about that crazy funnel that we're talking about.
Yep.
Of how solvent these banks are. But I want to talk about what if we see a break over 65K with conviction where it starts running to like 70K plus. What do you see if in the market in that kind of range? Do you see it just having no ceiling and just shooting straight up to 100K? Like what kind of timeline would you put on it? And like how would you feel about a clear break over all-time highs?
Yeah, so I think regardless of a near-term shakeout from sell the news or not, it doesn't matter. I think Bitcoin is going to push to all-time highs, I would say end of the month or sometime in November. And when that happens, when we get those strong weekly closes above 64.8K, we will enter price discovery, and we're still deep in a supply shock. So price, I expect, is going to soar to probably 70, 80K because there's a lot of just fib extensions to the upside. But I do think we'll have big rallies, but also a few more shakeouts in this cycle. So it's not going to be we're going to 200K whatever plus in just one shot. No, there's going to be a big rally, shakeout, more big rallies, shakeouts. So because we're in this very large wave 5 to the upside. So there will be lots of volatility and more opportunities to add. So I think the acceleration of the price appreciation, it's going to be very, very quick. I think price is going to move much faster. We're probably going to see $10,000 candles more frequently. I mean, we had our first.
The funny thing is,
last month. Yeah.
Would you be surprised? That's a crazy part about Bitcoin is like you look at it and because it's only 1 trillion right now. I just think to myself, this could easily start running trillions of dollars because it's like there's so many different possible wildcards to get it to run. It's like if you woke up tomorrow and it was 75K, it'd be like, wow, that's amazing. But would you really be surprised?
Yeah, I mean, it's when it comes to parts of this cycle, the later halves of the cycles are the quickest. So we saw Bitcoin double, triple in a matter of not even a month, back in the old cycles. I forgot the numbers, but it happens very quickly because that's when price goes parabolic. You get the retail FOMO, supply shock. I mean, anything can happen, but I think the most likely scenario is Bitcoin is going to push much, much higher, and it's going to be very quick, and people will be caught off guard. The bears they're in complete denial right now. But I think once all-time highs...
You've been calling that out since it's crazy how long you've been calling that out for, bro. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. It's like you've been calling, remember James Bang on Twitter? It's like he's gone now. I don't even know where he is. I feel so sorry for him. He's a great guy too. But it's like, why would you short something like this? It just makes no sense. And you've been saying that since the very beginning.
Yeah, even if you pay me to short Bitcoin, I'm not going to do it. It's just not worth it. There's so much more money to be made going long. Like you can pay me to short Bitcoin. I'm not going to do it. I don't care. There's so much more money to be made going long. So yes, there's opportunities to short here and there, but that's only on a short-term basis, and that's high risk because, as you keep saying on Spaces, there's so many catalysts and possibilities of these just crazy announcements or things that could happen that could happen any moment, and then as soon as you get a big announcement when no one expects it, that's when price really moves. And when you factor in the bullish on-chain, the supply shock. A lot of the miners and long holders, they don't want to sell. I mean, supply is so dried up. We're at multi-year lows on reserves. So, and that keeps going down. So it's just a really favorable macro condition for Bitcoin. And I think once we get those big catalysts, I think a lot of new wave of capital will keep coming into the market. And that's going to push Bitcoin, way above 60K, 65K. And I really think, I'm not sure if we'll hit 500,000 this cycle. I really think we're going to hit somewhere between like 178, 190, 200. If we hit the very bullish scenario, I would say 250, 300K. But anything higher, I think that's a bit out there. I think maybe later this decade for sure, because I'm looking at $1 million later this decade. But I mean, there's still plenty of upside. And one thing I want to just kind of make very clear is that yes, altcoins are probably going to outperform Bitcoin this cycle. But what I keep telling people is to focus on Bitcoin looking out in the next 3, 5, 7, and 10 years. Because what I think is most of these altcoins, I would say 80% at least, are not going to be around in the next 5, 10 years. There's just not enough room in the market for these altcoins. There's only room, in my opinion, for a handful of winners, maybe 3 or 5 or even 10. But I think out of all of them, Bitcoin will be around, and Bitcoin is the safest and has actually the most upside when you look at this decade. So, and yes, like alts are incredible. They have all these scalability technologies, amazing stuff. But the thing is, they still have regulatory risk, and Bitcoin seems to be the most protected out of all of them. But as a multi-generational store of wealth, and also just a multi-generational multi-generational buying opportunity, I think Bitcoin is still the best out of all of them. So yes, people will make millions trading alts, but I think the best way is just to buy and hold Bitcoin and hold for the decade.
Absolutely. Yeah, it feels like such a gamble with the altcoin space. I mean, you know me, I'm only in Bitcoin. I don't get into any altcoins, no Ethereum, no Cardano, none of that. Maybe a little bit of banana bread. Have you seen the memes floating around Twitter? People will listen and be like, what in the world are you talking about? But the thing that I think about with Bitcoin and why I became, I guess I can't call myself a Bitcoin maxi because you'd have to be like all in with nothing else. But the only crypto I own is Bitcoin, and the only one I believe in is Bitcoin. And the reason for that is the problem itself is really simple. As complex as people want to make it out to be, the problem is simple. We just need sound money in the digital realm. We need some sort of sound money that's decentralized in the digital realm. The solution is very complex, but I find that Bitcoin is the solution to that simple problem. And once you've had that solution, it's like when I look at Ethereum, if it was to be money or to be considered like a commodity asset like Bitcoin, it would basically have a situation where like when we see these NFTs coming into the market and we see that kind of clogging up the pipes of Ethereum, then it takes away the aspect of it possibly being money almost, because it's like you go, okay, well, sound money doesn't want to get its system clogged up by a bunch of JPEGs, or a bunch of NFTs. People will be mad if I call them JPEGs, but it's like that system is getting clogged up, and now the gas fees are through the roof. And so the narrative that used to be Bitcoin is going to be so expensive to send around, now it's Ethereum with its gas prices are so expensive, and people don't want to send it around due to those gas prices being so expensive. And it's because they overcomplicated the simple problem, it seems. And it seems like all these altcoins are overcomplicating the problem that is just we need sound money in the digital realm, and Bitcoin does a great job at that. Then when you add the Lightning Network on top of it, now it just completely invalidates like pretty much all the altcoins. Like the Doge, like if Dogecoin was meant to be the peer-to-peer payment situation there, well, it's inflationary. So I know that some people say the inflation goes down over time with it or whatever. But if you have Lightning Network with a hard cap of Bitcoin and it's divisible to 100 million units of account per Bitcoin in Satoshis, and you can send it peer-to-peer, and people are literally buying coffee right now in El Salvador, literally buying McDonald's right now in El Salvador. And these are major companies that are having to be forced to learn how to accept Bitcoin on the Lightning Network with this Chivos wallet or Chiva wallet or whatever. It just like invalidates all the altcoins in my mind and makes me so much more bullish on Bitcoin. It's just crazy that already exists right now. So I'm happy you brought up the altcoin space. It's like, yeah, if you want to gamble, go ahead and gamble, but know that you're in the casino. If you want, and it's funny, these altcoiners, if you notice that they're all saying the same narrative of, I put my money in Bitcoin, like I store my profits in Bitcoin. So it's gambling and trading, doing all those capital gains, and then going and storing the profits in Bitcoin. So it just seems crazy to me to be in the altcoin space, but some are doing it. How do you feel about everything going on with Ethereum right now and relative to Bitcoin? Because obviously I'm much more biased towards Bitcoin, but with everything going on, I'm just curious what your thoughts are on it.
Yeah, I think I don't have too much to say about Ethereum and all these other coins. I think the whole point I want to make is that a lot of the people that are bragging about all the money that they're making in alts, I see it as short-termism because they're not really looking out 3, 5, 7, 10 years. But I think when it comes to people investing in Bitcoin, like the long-term holders, the people that are focusing on multi-generational wealth, then they're seeing the bigger picture. So, because yes, there's money to be made short-term, but I think what we focus on is more important because, there's money to be made in cycles. But for us Bitcoiners, when you look at the much longer-term view, you start valuing things like decentralization or the security of the network or the adoption or the addressable market, the scarcity, the program monetary policy, it's just so many things to talk about for Bitcoin. And so, there's a lot of hype in the altcoin market, and yes, I understand it, and there's amazing technologies, but I think it really comes down to people's priorities. So when it comes to altcoins, it's most likely just short-term stuff, quick flip here and there. And when it comes to Bitcoin, it's more about long-term generational wealth, preserving purchasing power. And these are things, in my opinion, that matter much more than making a quick 5, 10x short-term.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. One of the things that we've talked about in the past, and I think we brought it up briefly in this conversation, is these miners that are actually accumulating Bitcoin on their balance sheet. They're mining Bitcoin, They're accumulating on their balance sheet. They're not selling this Bitcoin. And when they are selling it, it's only because they do it on more of a strategic type of profiting basis. I think Venture had brought it up in the last Twitter Spaces that we did. Is there anything in specific that you're seeing with these miners right now at these prices? I know you brought it up a little bit earlier, but if you anything in detail that you wanted to talk about with the on-chain, off-chain type situation with these miners?
Yeah, so the miners are a very, very interesting group. Like we talked about before on Spaces, I see them as the most bullish investor cohort in Bitcoin because they're the people that are investing hundreds of millions of dollars, if not billions of dollars, into mining Bitcoin. So whether it's getting all the infrastructure, energy, all the facilities, hiring people, I mean, it's a lot of work. So the fact that they're doing this indicates that they're very bullish on Bitcoin long term. And as Venture and TXMC mentioned on Spaces, the behavior has changed drastically on Bitcoin miners. They have not been selling Bitcoin as aggressively as before from previous cycles. And it really shows that the miners, they don't want to sell, and they view Bitcoin as an appreciating asset long term, and that their priority is to accumulate Bitcoin, not to accumulate it and sell like gold miners, right? They mine and they sell right away. Well, Bitcoin, it's different.
Sure.
They're just holding. So the reserves are essentially flat. We're not seeing any aggressive distribution, even with all these price gains, which is crazy, right? Because price goes up, but you expect people to start taking profit. Well, they're not. And these cohorts, whether it's long-term holders or miners, they make up a huge chunk of the total supply. So these people aren't selling. So who's been selling? Well, it's all the weak hands and all the traders. They don't matter long term. What matters are the long-term holders and the miners. So yes, they will distribute, as price appreciates. But the fact that the price is up, more than double since 30K, and in the last month, 35%, whatever plus, and we're not seeing any form of aggressive selling. That says a lot about the structure of the market, and it's very bullish.
It's just crazy because for people that are just watching now and they never heard of OnChain, and I'm still learning a lot about OnChain, luckily from having my good friend Daniel here, it's such a different world because you're not able to see this kind of data with just traditional stocks or anything really, because you actually can study when Bitcoin is leaving an exchange, when Bitcoin is going to an exchange, what wallets are holding Bitcoin, how long they're holding the wallet. Like just if you could briefly describe on-chain for somebody that might be a complete noob and hasn't learned anything about it, like myself or somebody listening here, because a lot of my audience is from the precious metals community and they're just learning about Bitcoin, maybe putting a small amount on their balance sheet to learn. Not financial advice, I have to say that real quick, but what brought you to on-chain? If you could briefly describe on-chain and what it means to you.
Yeah, so for me, on-chain was very interesting and attractive because I come from a more traditional finance background. So macro, technical analysis, fundamentals, stuff like that. But it got to a point where with Bitcoin, with technicals, you can identify support resistance and the trend and things like that, but it can't tell you what's happening behind the scenes. And that's where on-chain got my attention, because what on-chain does is it pulls data from the blockchain, and through a lot of algorithms and kind of just figuring out just cohorts and wallet sizes and holding periods and all these things and all forms of metrics, you can figure out what's happening, what the buyers and sellers are doing, or what the type of buyer has been doing. You can identify patterns in the market. And that's why we talk about long-term holders and miners and distribution accumulation, because that's what dictates price. And also you can figure out supply and demand. So for example, I track a lot of metrics using age bands on the UTXOs. So when I see something big happening, like a specific cohort selling, I can use other metrics on chain and verify if they sold or not, if they did at a profit or a loss. I can look at previous history of this cohort's behavior. You can look at so many kind of interesting details of what they're doing. So you can look at micro trends, you can look at macro trends. What I focus more on is the macro side of on-chain, because I think that's what on-chain is better for doing. It kind of identifies the overall trend of the market. And I keep saying that as bullish because it is. So, and over time, right, when the cycles do finish, you'll see the long-term holders start distributing, their supply will start dropping, and then they start dumping essentially on the short-term holders, which is all the retail and the dumb money coming in, chasing the rallies in the end. So we have not even gotten close to that yet. So that means there's a lot of upside. And there's also a lot of ways to use on-chain to identify kind of the fundamental valuation metrics of Bitcoin. And they're still very cheap. So every aspect you look at Bitcoin, it's really bullish.
It's just fascinating stuff. And you've been following like certain wallets that hold a ton of Bitcoin, right? You have like the largest whale wallet in the world or something like that. Is there anything specific you're seeing that wallet do? In anything in like these large whale wallets with Bitcoin?
Yeah, so that for disclosure, so that third largest wallet, we don't know if it's an exchange or an entity or not. We don't know, but just looking at the activity, it did do a pretty good job at marking local tops and also buying opportunities. So it's been taking a bit of profit lately, but that's because the price was testing key resistance on a technical and on-chain basis. But more importantly, when you look at the long-term trend of this specific wallet, it's been net accumulating for 2 years. And then zooming out more, if you look at the overall trend in on-chain, a lot of long-term holders and miners are also been in net accumulation. So uh, we just kind of reference that wallet now and then just to kind of see what's going on. But no matter how you look at it, the trend is very, very strong for Bitcoin. And I think we're at a point where we're just waiting for the next big catalyst to come in the market. So I think those catalysts are obviously the ETF is a big one. I think we're going to have whether it's the news already happened or not. I think that's kind of like we're kind of past that. So now it's more of the earnings season, the company announcements, announcing who bought Bitcoin. And I think the more ways of adoption and just positive news flow and the supply shock continuing. So that, probably this Q4 will be very, very powerful. I think we'll probably see 90K to 100K by end of year. And I do see the cycle extending out probably into a little bit into Q1 next year. And if that happens, then we have a lot more upside. So there's a lot of upside for Bitcoin.
Yeah, it's just when you're able to look when you look at all of this data to be short Bitcoin, it's like, and the fact that they exist, the fact that MicroStrategy has a short interest against it, it's like you really want to pick up pennies in front of a steamroller here, don't you? I mean, it doesn't seem like a good idea, but they're doing it. And so it's like to see to briefly just like describe in a simplified way for somebody like myself listening to it that doesn't know as much as you as on-chain. It's like you get to see the data as Bitcoin goes up, how much of it is flowing around and what wallets it's going to and which ones, how it's going to the exchange, what miner might be selling to an exchange. All of this data is there that you just can't see in the stock market. You can't see anywhere else. There's so much more transparency there, which is just wild for this asset in specific. So I've said it in the past. I'll say it again. It seems that it's foolish to be all in, foolish to have none. And if I had none right now, even at these prices, I'd have anxiety. I'd have anxiety. I don't know if I could sleep at night. Like, how would you feel if you were trying to time this market, Daniel? Like if you had no Bitcoin right now, you just learned about it today. You've just to clarify for anybody listening, he nailed the trade. He's been accumulating Bitcoin since 30,000 and below. But if you had none right now, if you're watching this right now and you saw Bitcoin up at 62,000, you're going, wow, it's so high right now. What would you say to that individual, or how would you feel if you were that individual? Would you be buying today? Would you be scaling in? Like, how would you, and not financial advice, just to clarify with that, but just curious if you were in that position.
Yeah, so let's just say I was someone with no exposure to Bitcoin, and I've seen the current setup and the conditions, technical, on-chain, fundamental. I would likely buy a little bit today, right now, even though it's at $63,000, but I would not go all in at one price point. I recommend scaling in slowly, understanding technicals and on-chain, and buying the dips over time. And that's the best way. So there's always risk of these liquidations and wipeouts and also FUD, but those, in my opinion, provide long-term buying opportunities for Bitcoin. So, because I think Bitcoin will keep going up and up over time. I mean, that's just how it is. The program monetary policy, the scarcity, less and less supply coming on the market over time, every 4 years with halving. So it just makes sense to dollar cost average. And don't trade it, because trading Bitcoin is just pointless. It's a waste of time, energy, it's stressful. I used to do that and I got burned. So years ago, I stopped trading and I just started focusing on long-term accumulation, and my returns have been much, much higher. And my stress levels have dropped significantly. So now I'm just very relaxed. So
it's so true.
So that's the best way to do it. Just accumulate dips, understand where we are in the cycle, study on chain, look at the trends, and just listen to podcasts and learn more about it. Because the more you learn about Bitcoin, the more bullish you become, and naturally you allocate more to it. So remember, I used to be a skeptic of Bitcoin. Now I think it's the best asset in the world. I mean, I completely flipped because I did my research, the light bulb went off, and I bought some, and then I kept, learning about it, and now I've fallen so deep in the rabbit hole I can't get out. So obviously, it's with my approach, I'm more data driven, fundamental, technical, on chain, macro, but I'm looking at multiple forms of analysis, and they're all saying very, very positive things about Bitcoin on a mid to long term basis. So in my opinion, I think my thesis is playing out very well, and I'm going to keep watching the data. So yes, I will turn bearish on Bitcoin looking at the cycle, because the cycle is always peak and there's always a pullback in the end. But looking at this decade, I think it's up and only up when you look at the decade. So yes, there will be bear markets in the future, but those bottoms, in my opinion, will be much higher than the current levels of Bitcoin. So it's all perspective. If you think short term, you're just going to get hurt from emotions and quick dumps and here and this and that. But when you think about an asset from a decade-long plus point of view, the fundamentals and everything behind it, it really changes your perspective. And I think Bitcoin is like the only thing in the world that has changed my view of life. Because with Apple, it was like technology and mobile wave. With Tesla, it's energy, it's the self-driving vehicles, the technology platform they're building. But with Bitcoin, it addresses everything in your life. And I think us as Americans, we don't fully see that because we haven't suffered in a hyperinflationary environment or have these radical government changes or even war in our home country. But those things have destroyed fiat currencies in other countries, and people are desperate to find value. So they bought gold, and now they're buying Bitcoin. So that's why I think you have to keep an open mind about Bitcoin, because it's not just some silly internet magical money thing. No, this is a store of value. It's energy for the world. Michael Saylor said it so well. I can't paraphrase it, but it's just when you think about Bitcoin,
you're doing just fine.
Yeah.
You're paraphrasing just fine. Keep going, man. I got to give yourself more credit. I'm getting excited right now.
I'm half awake, sorry, but when you think about Bitcoin in that regard, not short-termism, but long-term, multi-generational focus, and all the aspects of life, all the addressable markets, that Bitcoin can essentially take money out of. I mean, it's just so early. I mean, the whole, stocks, real estate, fiat currencies, precious metals, I mean, all that and more art is just $900 trillion. And we're at just over 1 trillion for Bitcoin today. So if you just 1%, 2%, 5%, 10% of the world's wealth goes into Bitcoin, there's so much upside. It's not even funny. So I think this is just the early days. I think later this decade, we'll come back and we'll laugh at ourselves saying, wow, we thought 65,000 was so expensive, or I wish I could have bought more. I know it sounds silly to say, but I really think that's the case. And I think that if you have no exposure, you should really build exposure. Just be cautious about how you accumulate and really focus on the technicals in the on-chain. So, yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, I see a world in the future where people think we're crazy. They think we're crazy that there's a possibility of a digital layer being out there that's decentralized, not connected to any government body, not connected to any individual party, no leader to it, and just in the digital realm where everybody around the world could agree that this is valuable in Bitcoin. And it seems like it's going to be like a checks and balances layer on the fiat currencies. Like it tokenizes them, drops the basket of fiat currencies and their value. And if people are not being treated correctly by their bank, they're not being treated correctly by their government, they can leave that currency and then go into that decentralized layer there. It's a beautiful thing. It really is.
I totally agree.
And I see like peer-to-peer commerce happening in Bitcoin. Like people are still going to be buying stuff. People are still going to be doing things along those lines, but they might just have that decentralized digital layer that's not connected to some bank or something along those lines.
I think that's the most powerful thing that we've seen in human history, because I guess whenever a government has been around since day one, I mean, we didn't really have a choice on how we, accumulate wealth, because our money is tied to dollars or stocks or real estate, but all these things can be taken away from us by the government. But with Bitcoin, we now have a choice where we don't have to be part of the system. I mean, it can be integrated, But it's amazing to see that now we have an ability to actually safely store our assets and to really own it. And I know it doesn't sound that crazy, but when you just buy that Bitcoin and you put it in your own cold storage wallet and you just kind of experience that, it's like mind blowing. Or even just sending the Bitcoin to someone else through Lightning, or even on Layer 1, it doesn't matter. Just by getting your dipping your toes in the water and understanding how it works and experiencing it, that is game changing, because once you kind of that kind of just builds momentum for more of I guess falling down the rabbit hole, because most people that I see that done that, they haven't gone out. So I mean, how many people do you know that bought Bitcoin and said, nah, I don't like it, I'm gonna go back to dollars? Or how many people do you know that watched their the Venezuelan dollar collapse and went back to it? No, they left. So I think it's the same thing with Bitcoin. Why would you go back to dollars? That's what Saylor said. Why would I go back to dollars? There's no point. It's devaluing 10, 12, 15% a year. There's no point in going back. So, and that's why I keep saying, I know I'm ranting here, but that's why a few months ago I was like, I don't look at the dollar value of my Bitcoin holdings anymore. I look at the amount of Bitcoin that I own, because I think that could be more relevant in the future. So yes, my Bitcoin holdings, the dollar value is all-time highs. It's very good. I'm happy about that. But when you think about how much Bitcoin you have, it just makes you want to own more and more Bitcoin. So I recently hit these like long-term targets of, yes, I own this amount of Bitcoin. That's great. But now it's like, oh man, I want more now. So I'm trying to I got to make more money. I got to make more fiat so I can buy more Bitcoin. That's kind of how I'm looking at it.
Yeah. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Yeah, so if you just go back a couple of years and you tell me that I'm going to be saying these things today, I'll be like, you're crazy. No way that's going to happen. I'm going to hodl my Apple. I'm going to hodl all my growth stocks. I'm never going to buy Bitcoin like that. Well, I did.
Yeah, I mean, same with me, bro. Same with me. I mean, if I was so critical of Bitcoin, I followed all Peter Schiff's models and stuff, and I'm happy to say that I'm one of the people from Precious Metals that thinks it's like, my first argument I had made for it when I first found out about Bitcoin. The videos are still posted where I said, I think Peter Schiff is wrong about this. Literally in the title, I put Peter Schiff is wrong, and that attracted him to go comment on the video. So that was kind of a low blow by me. But it's just, I realized, I'm like, wait a minute, I can have self-custody of this. I can actually take this off the exchange and put it into my own device. That's insane. Yep. And so when I started studying it and actually learning more about it, and I got some friends in that space and started teaching me more, like yourself, I just went, wow, like it's if anything, it's a fantastic insurance policy. You know, yes. if you know, like if somebody totally doesn't believe in it, look at what Ray Dalio is doing. Look at what Paul Tudor Jones is doing. These are billionaires that were very critical of Bitcoin, but they're putting a 5% position in because it's a great insurance policy. And when I first got into Bitcoin, it was below 10,000. I looked at it as insurance. Now it's more than 6x from my original investment. So obviously that insurance policy worked out. And now when I'm looking at it, I still am very bullish on the same precious metals that I was bullish on in the past, you know, silver, platinum, palladium, not very much with gold, but I like the utility precious metals. I think they're super undervalued here, but, I think it's foolish to just discount Bitcoin into nothingness, like to think that it's not going to be something big. It's like the more I play with it, the more fascinated I become with the idea that we could actually have, when we most of the money in the world is already digital. Most of the, like 93% of dollars are already digital, something along those lines. More than 90% of dollars are digital. Mm-hmm. It's like, well, if we already have cashless society and we're moving towards these CBDCs, do you want them to be in control of the digital money? Do you want these banks that are insolvent to be in control of your digital money? Or do you want to be in control of your digital money? Have your tangibles, that's fine, but make sure you're in control of your digital money. You know, and Bitcoin is that. It's a hard cap. It can be divisible. That most people don't know. If you're watching this, you can own a fractional amount of Bitcoin. You can own a small amount. You don't have to buy a full coin. A lot of people that are watching this, they might think you have to go and spend 62,309. Woo! But a lot of people think that, but you can own a fractional amount. These are divisible by 100 million units of account called Satoshi. So you can buy 1 million Satoshi, and that's divided by that price divided by 100. So what's it for 1 million Satoshis? What does that come out to? Like $600, something along those lines? I don't know if the math is correct in my head, but it's not as much as you think to own 1 million Satoshis. And these are divisible by 100 million Satoshis. So you can own a fractional amount of Bitcoin, and it's a great insurance policy. I still stand by that. And now I've gotten even more bullish than just calling it an insurance policy. I hope it succeeds. And I think that overall, if it succeeds, everything benefits. All commodities benefit. The whole world would benefit by a layer that's not dictated by some crazy body that can just inject money at will by the tune of trillions and trillions of dollars. It's just wild the way the system works. It's scary. And so Bitcoin is the solution to that problem. And Daniel, you put it so eloquently. It's such an honor talking with you. And I hope everybody who watches this video, I hope you go and you follow Daniel on his Twitter. It's Daniel Joe 916. I'll put it in the description down below. Anywhere else that people could find you online, and any kind of like closing statements that you have on Bitcoin, these current levels, and just any kind of closing comments? I know I've taken a lot of your time. I know you said till 10 p.m. Pacific and it's 10:30. So I've done it again where I take too much of your time, Daniel. I'm trying to be I have so much fun talking to you. Sometimes we get off air and we'll talk for like another 3 hours on here. So wanted to say if you have any closing remarks, but make sure you follow him on Twitter, and the link will be in the description down below.
Yeah. Well, first of all, Rob, I really appreciate you having me here. It's always good to be back on. It's our second time recording a podcast, but we talk like every week on Spaces, so that's awesome. But to close, so I just want to make it clear for people that have yet to buy Bitcoin, don't be intimidated by the price, because it doesn't really matter if you think about it. I think what matters more is looking at the market value of Bitcoin and comparing it to other assets in the world. When you think about that, then it makes really Bitcoin, or it shows that Bitcoin is so small compared to gold, compared to stocks, compared to real estate, or the total addressable market. So I think the unit bias is a little unfortunate because of just how, the hard cap of Bitcoin at 21 million. But when you talk about Bitcoin surpassing gold or becoming worth tens of trillions, then we're talking about millions and millions of dollars per Bitcoin because of the hard cap. So just for perspective, yes, the price is important for technicals and analyzing the charts and whatever. But when you look at a larger long-term point of view, focus on market cap, because it's going to eat up gold, it's going to eat up stocks, it's going to eat up real estate, it's going to eat up chunks of the wealth of the world. So think of it like that, and also just the scarcity and everything we talked about, decentralization, having true ownership of assets. I mean, that all ties in. So that's what I would say. And just dollar cost average, buy the dips, don't believe the FUD, look at the data, look at the on-chain trend. That's what matters. The media is just there to play with emotions. If you follow the media, you would have panic sold the lows in September and back in July and June. So the data and the trend is the most important. I'll leave it there.
That's so awesome, man. Thank you so much for doing this again, Daniel. I'm sure we'll do this much more in the future. Now we got a weekly series we're doing over there in these Twitter spaces. So if you're not on Twitter, some people want to be over there, some people don't, but these Twitter spaces are really something special where we can do these live podcasts in real time. I've been thinking about doing recording ours in the future or something along those lines so we could post them later on or something. We'll talk about that off air. But Daniel, thank you again so much for doing these, and I really look forward to doing our next podcast in the near future. If you're watching this, have a great rest of your day, and we will see you at the next video.